pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Around the table, I'm joined by my peers on the school board. Mr. Grubb and Mr. Tate are traveling on business tonight, as well as members of the administration. Our agenda tonight will consist of a quick introduction and some housekeeping by Dr. Fraser. We'll talk about the property appraisal process. We'll then get into the meat of the meeting, which will deal with conceptual redistricting scenarios, and we'll have some discussion around potential elementary school consolidation, and then we'll take public comment at the end. Dr. Fraser, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Block. Good evening, members of the board, and good evening, members of our CR community. As Mr. Block just had referenced, this evening is session 4 of a scheduled 5 meetings, at least for the time being. And as Mr. Block had also just mentioned, our agenda for this evening looks as follows. We will review our recent property appraisal process. Mr. Bob Reinhart, our Director of Business Administration, will provide that presentation. And then Mr. George Sundell from Sundance Associates will be here with us this evening once again to first give us a review of our school projections. We had provided a report previously on school projections, and we are going to provide a bit of a review of those school projections and then move in to, as you see on the screen, a review of elementary school capacities and sections, which had also been previously provided, and then something that I know that we have all been looking forward to and we have been talking about for quite some time in the form of our conceptual redistricting scenarios. And I do want to say once again, as has been said many times previously, that these conceptual redistricting scenarios are a very high level look. They are not a neighborhood by neighborhood, much less a street by street look. This is the proverbial 30,000 foot lens that we apply to redistricting. And when you see scenarios up there, really there are 3 different scenarios. One is status quo, meaning that all 3 of our elementary schools would remain open. One would be the closure of Rolling Hills Elementary School, and the third scenario would be the closure of Wrightstown Elementary School. So the question is, what might redistricting look like conceptually, and only conceptually, based upon all 3 of those scenarios? And tonight, for our board and for our community, is the first sneak peek at that. So a big night in this master capital planning process from that standpoint. And then we will move into board discussion, with the topic being potential elementary school consolidation. More on that board discussion and what that might look like here. I'll come back and revisit that in just a couple moments. And then, as we always do, we will conclude the evening, as Mr. Block said, with public comment. But before we come back to this evening, let's take a quick look ahead, because this evening is, as we said, the 4th of 5 meetings. Our 5th meeting is 4 weeks from tonight, Monday, May 22nd, likewise at 7 p.m. And priority topics 4 weeks from tonight will be as follows. First, we want to take a look at the anticipated efficiencies that are to be gained by closing an elementary school. Whether that school be Rolling Hills Elementary or Wrightstown Elementary School, what are the anticipated efficiencies that we would expect to be gained? And what that means is this. Right now at Rolling Hills Elementary School, we are running 20 sections. It's 19 classrooms, but it's 20 sections. Should that school be closed and those students be redistricted, would we still need, in terms of those Rolling Hill students, to be running 20 sections, or by the time they're redistricted, might that only be 19 sections or 18 or even 17 sections? There's analysis that we can do that can help us make a predictive guess in terms of answering that question. Likewise, at Wrightstown Elementary School, we are currently running 10 sections. It's 11 sections. It's 10 classrooms, but 11 sections. should Wrightstown Elementary School be closed and thus those students redistricted, by the time those students would be redistricted, would that still be taking up the equivalency of 10 classrooms, or would it be 9 or 8 or 7 or some other number? Again, there's analytical work that we can engage in with the help of Mr. Sundell that can help us do predictive work in that area. So it's critically important work before we can make any educated decisions around potential school consolidation at the elementary level, so we can anticipate that information and those answers at the May 22nd meeting. The other piece on May 22nd. Okay. The other piece on May 22nd is in terms of school bus runs. Anticipated maximum bus runs, in particular for Wrightstown Elementary School. Why Wrightstown? Because simply Wrightstown is a very large geographical area. So should Wrightstown close, we would suppose that a number of students would be redistricted to Sulpheinstone Elementary, a number to Newtown Elementary, and a number to Richboro Elementary. Within that scenario, Richboro Elementary now feeding into Newtown Middle and North High School. So the question is, those homes, those students who live farthest away from those elementary schools, what would we anticipate those bus runs looking like? That's also information we want to have before we make any kinds of decisions regarding consolidation. And then the final piece is simple opportunity cost analysis, yet very detailed opportunity cost analysis for all three of these scenarios. Status quo, the closure of Rolling Hills, and the closure of Wrightstown. What are the pros? What are the cons? What does this look like from an educational standpoint? What does this look like from a social standpoint? What does this look like from a fiscal standpoint? We want to provide that level of detailed information to the board, and we want to provide that level of detailed information to the public. So that's another body of work that we expect as a deliverable at the Monday, May 22nd meeting. Mr. Block.
So I just want to say, there's a lot of work that has gone on behind the scenes to get ready for each of these meetings, and it's been a building process. So we've gone through different bits of work over the course of the last three and this fourth meeting at the beginning of the fifth. But ultimately what we'll get to next week is a culmination of all that work together to understand what the true consolidated impact of all these different discussions would be for a status quo, for a closure, for one or the other. So it will position everybody to really have some perspectives on what the course of action should be.
Thank you. And so with that in mind, again, knowing what's coming up on May 22nd in terms of those three deliverables, those three reports, tonight, again, I'm sorry, we'll get to tonight in a minute. The question before us is this: should we schedule a sixth meeting for early June? And the reason why I asked that question is because when I was initially tasked with developing a timeline for the master capital planning process this past fall, I developed that timeline such that we would be making a decision regarding elementary school consolidation in the month of June. And we have now had 3 meetings. We are in the midst of a 4th meeting. We know what the content looks like this evening. Before you hear is the content of the 5th meeting. Obviously, we can add content to that 5th meeting, should there be a desire to do so. And I would place before the board for consideration this evening, and it will be by the time we get to board discussion here this evening, the question is, do we want to add a meeting in early June to take up the issue for board discussion and board deliberation to make a decision regarding elementary school elementary school consolidation, excuse me. I think potentially we have enough information at this point to make a decision, combined with the information that we will receive on May 22nd. So again, before you this evening, you know that we're going to review the enrollment projections. You know that we're going to review the elementary school capacities and sections. You know that we're going to have a first look at conceptual redistricting scenarios. And then you also know that coming up on May 22nd, we will take a look at anticipated efficiencies to be gained by closing either of those two elementary schools. We'll take a look at what bus runs look like, and then we will have a thorough opportunity cost look and what that analysis looks like as well. And certainly, as we engage in that board discussion this evening and consider whether we feel prepared in early June to make a decision, if there's any additional information that is desired from a readiness standpoint, the administration would stand prepared to deliver that information, I would presume, on May 22nd.
Yeah, and I think the question is a good one. It's going to be my recommendation. And the importance here is the end of school. And what we don't want to do is have big discussions and decisions leak through the summer, nor wait if they don't have to through the summer. So the hope would be that we have enough information by the meeting on the 22nd. We could then call a meeting in early June that would give us a couple weeks, 10 days to digest that information, share it with other folks, hear from other folks, and then come back and potentially make some decisions that would let the school community and the potentially impacted communities, even though redistricting kind of impacts all of them, know what we're going to do before graduation. So we'll leave that conversation for the end of this agenda, but that's the idea.
Okay. And not leave two schools in limbo over the summer. Provided, of course, that we feel prepared to make that decision. If we don't, certainly, then we shouldn't.
Yep.
So it's based under that condition. As always, I do want to remind the community that we do have a capitalplanning@crsd.org email address that is set up, and we also have a frequently asked questions document on our website, and that all of our documents are archived on the website. This is the landing page. The font, I apologize, for those of you in the audience and watching at home, is getting smaller and smaller because the content is getting more and more plentiful. But I do suppose that's a good thing. But I think that you all know where to find this by now. On the home page, there is a link right on the home district page, just simply called Master Capital Planning Process, and that is where we segment meeting by meeting the videos as well as all of the documents, and we shall certainly continue to do so. So without further ado, let's get started with our reports and presentations for this evening, and we shall start with our appraisal process. And for that, presenting once again will be Mr. Bob Reinhart, our Director of Business Administration.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. Early on in this whole process, one of the items that the board had requested was information concerning the value of our buildings and the market value and what we could obtain if we choose to sell the properties. This evening's presentation is not going to be a detailed presentation or anything like that. I'm going to give you highlights of the appraisal reports. I just need you to see that these appraisal reports have a lot of information in it containing legal restrictions on buildings, physical restrictions, historical restrictions on buildings. And without reading the detail of this, some of this information could be misconstrued. I just want to say that before. There's also reasons why some of this information may not want to be shared until we would decide if we want to put something on the market or not put something on the market, understanding negotiations to sell a property. We entered into a contract with Indian Valley Appraisal Company for these appraisal reports for internal planning purposes. They provide market values based on the highest and best use based on the criteria that I've listed up there. This is so important for you to know about highest and best use. For the appraiser to determine what is the highest and best use, it needs to be physically possible, legally permissible, And that has a lot to do with the zoning and different deed restrictions that are on the properties, financially feasible, and then really productive. You need to know what the value of it would be to have someone want to purchase a property. Concept of highest and best use, the reasonable, probable legal use of vacant land or an improved property which is physically possible, appropriately supported, financially feasible, and the results in the highest value. That is the definition as what they use. All properties have significant zoning, historic district restrictions that will complicate any issue of our sales. And again, as I said before, the complete reports really need to be read and understood to really be able to make a clear, concise understanding of the values. The board does have access to these reports and they are available for their review. What I'm going to do now is go over just the appraisal summaries, and I'm going from low to high. The house trackers, which is up on 413, is really raw land, and therefore there really is not a high or a low. It's really a acreage value, and it's based on other properties that have been sold throughout this area with adjustments moving in and out of that. Richboro Middle School is, again, there's a range. Chancellor Center is a very large range in regard to that. And a lot of that has to do with different type of restrictions that are on Chancellor Center. Wrightstown Elementary School, you'll see the same type of information with improvements on the land and without the improvements on the land. I will tell you, if there is a suggestion that the land should be moved of all property, buildings and all that, any of the cost of that reduces the full value of the land. So some of these values, you'll see it's a net cost of getting really rid of a building to be able to sell land if you would want to do that. And that could be some of the low values that you see here. Rolling Hills is the same thing there. And Twining Ford. Many of these properties have specific institutional zoning in which it's really us or another government should be owning that. Should there be changes to that, there'd have to be some type of zoning approval to get that changed.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
Just for clarification. What I think you just said was there's some of the difference in the spread. I'm going to use Richboro Middle as an example. Between the $2,090,000 and $3.5 million is the removal of the building. So are you saying that the cost, they're calculating the cost for the district to raise that building and just sell it as raw land, and that $2,090,000 would be the net? Is that what you said?
What's that?
Can't hear what you said.
Okay.
He's asking if that is a net.
I don't know. Is
to be able
the
to
mic not
sell.
working?
If this is just,
Okay.
what's that?
Keep going, I'll check the background.
Okay.
You guys go. There you go.
Bob, can you repeat my question as you understood it?
Yes.
So that I can hear?
Looking at Richboro Middle School, there are two values in there. What I believe Mr. Violet is saying, he is assuming that this would be the value to sell the land without the building on it. And his question is to say, if that is that value, does that mean it'd be our responsibility to tear the building down, and the net cost of us tearing the building down and what we receive from the sale of the property, would that be that value? And that's what you said, I believe.
That's exactly.
I agree that that is exactly correct.
Thank you.
Yes. These are the values. That's really all I have to present tonight, is to go over those values that way.
Yeah, why don't we take just a quick 3 to 5 minute break, see if you can get these things working so everybody can hear. All right. So folks, in case you didn't hear me, we're going to take a 5-minute break to see if we can get these working so you can hear. So,
I can use that 5 minutes.
can you hear me, Nancy?
You're one of the only people who can hear that.
It's your mic.
It's my mic.
We're still recording this.
I think it's just in here, right? Broadcast is clear? Yeah. So you hear
Like Fraser did. Try to do
The price is 3.5 million. 3.5 million is 290. Our cost.
I didn't know you were that way.
Test 1 2. Testing. Test 1 2. Test. Testing. Testing 1. Testing. Testing 1 2. Testing 1 2. Test 1 2.
I don't want to be the only one who gets these.
Yeah, I was on red, so that's what I was saying. I'm just going to ask Clark. That's a
All right, we should be good now. They've gone. We replaced one back mic and checked all of the rest. I can hear it already. So I think we're in good shape. No need for me to sing a song and test it.
I think we need to continue on this slide. Mark, do you want to ask your question again or discuss what we were
Well,
discussing?
just for clarity for the public who couldn't hear before, why don't you just give a brief discussion of the difference between the $2,090,000 and the $3.5 million for Richboro Middle?
So for
As
this
an example for the rest
Yeah,
of
for this building only, and I can't tell you all of them because they're very different appraisals and issues with each building. But for this building only, this $2,090,000 is the net price that they believe we would receive if we tore the building down and sold the land. So that is the net value. That is the $800,000 or whatever to tear the building down, and that would be the net price for that. This value is a total separate calculation or market analysis, and that would be to say that's what we believe it would be, the value of the building and the land would be. There is not a direct connection between that calculation and this calculation. They're both done separately. All that's happening is the value of the raw land, and they said, well, if the raw land is worth $2.8 million, it's going to cost you $800,000 to tear the building down, so the net effect will be $2.1 million. Does everyone understand that?
Yes.
Okay. But I've got to make sure I emphasize enough that that is Richboro Middle. There are all different reasons for a lot of these properties. Twining Ford is very different than Richboro Middle. House Track is very different. Chancellor Center is very different. Probably the buildings here are pretty much the same. I would say the school buildings, because they have the same type of constraints.
I had a question.
Yeah, very well.
So I don't, over the years, many surrounding districts have sold property. And I've read accounts in the Courier about the kinds of prices they get. And it's always surprised me how little you get for these properties. But that said, these are surprisingly low to me. I mean, I was thinking, well, maybe something like the house track might be $3 to $5 million. I'm not an appraiser, but to your point earlier about reading the report. So when we sell land, we really want to put it out there, just like selling your house. We want to get excitement about it. We want to get the absolute best price we can. If someone is buying land, obviously they'll hire their appraiser. This is our appraiser. So we're not going to let everyone in the world read our appraiser's report. They can get their own appraiser if they're interested in buying land, right?
That'll be your decision. I support that decision greatly.
I mean, that's how I feel. But I being on the board, if I want to read some of these reports, is that something that I can do? I would like to do that.
Yes.
But I don't want everyone else to read them, honestly, because they're
Yes.
not
Those reports are available to you on board docs.
Right, because I definitely want, as a school board member, I want to make sure that these make sense, that there's a rationale. that I can understand.
I read every report, and I believe there's a strong rationale and very interesting to me. I learned a lot, I should say.
Well, thanks.
Yeah, I would agree with Dr. Foster specific to that point. I'd also be curious about the point you mentioned about restrictions around use and who would control those restrictions. So I'm assuming that's in there?
Yes.
Yeah, excellent. Any other questions or comments? Ms. Violet?
Yeah, just because Dr. Foster brought it up, I disagree. I think that if you're a private individual and you want to have your own evaluation done and keep that evaluation to yourself, I think it's fine. But we spent public dollars and we're a public entity to get these appraisals done, and I think the public deserves to be able to see them. I think that keeping them secret would be highly inappropriate. Even if it's legal, I think it's inappropriate.
Mr. Biley? I guess the one comment I thought a lot about that, I think transparency is important, but I also think just personally that it's our job to get the best result that we can from the district. In some case, that would mean getting the best value from the district. And I think by, leaving the information that we shared broad, and I might have actually advocated not to share, but I recognize that was the decision of this board to do that. By not sharing broad information, that gives us the best opportunity to get the best for the public. But as far as the transparency part goes to, which you're concerned about, which I do believe in, I think as we would close any potential deal, if we went there, we should be required then to show everything that we have, to show that, and be accountable to the public, to show that we've gotten a good deal with the information that we have. So that's why I would agree with Dr. Foster. Does anybody else have a comment?
I'm just torn in terms of we're a school district. We're not in the real estate business. And yet I know that we also need to be as careful as we can with regard to information that is shared that could potentially impact income or revenue that could come to the school district. But it feels very muddy to me. I'm not questioning the decision at all. I am by no means questioning your integrity. I know this is probably the right move to make, but it doesn't feel right. And I'm sure you feel much the same way.
I will feel responsible if we put something on the market to get the best price for the community, and that's where I'm coming from. And knowing that in the right to know law, that it has a specific exclusion to hold everything until the property is sold, that gave me additional credence in my position.
Can you tell me, I'm sure you discussed this with our attorney, what his advice was?
Our attorney's advice was also probably to be a little less open even with these numbers because of the down the road of the sales. When we get there, we may be looking back and saying maybe we shouldn't have shared those numbers because this could influence the negotiations in a sale. People have different views on that, and if we have 100 people wanting our properties, I'm sure that market will change the way things go. But if there's 1 or 2 people with our property, they're going to look at these numbers and say, we know where we're going to be, right around those numbers. And that might be the ceiling, and that's what concerns me.
Any other questions for Mr. Reinhart? Thank you, sir.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Reinhart. So moving on, we're going to move into 3 different presentations, reports shared by Mr. Sundell from Sundance Associations. The first one, again, is a revisit of enrollment projections. Then we will move into elementary capacity and sections, a presentation on that, and then the first look at our conceptual redistricting scenarios. So with that said, welcome back, Mr. Sundell.
Thank you, Dr. Fraser. I want to quickly recap where we were last time I was here with a summary of what the enrollment projections said. As a reminder, we'll just do a little bit on methodology. I want to remind you that Our kindergarten years really starts with a number that's 5 years earlier and based on how many births there were in those years. And we saw that at least since 2007, the enrollments have been decreasing, except for 1 year where they popped up. But in general, there is a 13-year fewer births every year trend in the district. You need to remember that for now, since 2007, 13 fewer births every year, but we don't use that number in the projection. We use the average of the last 6 years. So again, in our projection, we used 478 births per year. And that number just in the next year is 37 higher. So if the trend continues, that 13 fewer, we're already in our projection for just next year, 37 higher than what it would be if we were using trends. Now, the second year into the projection, it would be even more than that. So I want you to understand that there's that edge, and we're being very conservative by using the higher numbers. Higher enrollment gives us less room for moving things about in the district. So we're always using the conservative number. We also, in the case of births to kindergarten, which again is the base number from which all the other future enrollments are built, normally you use, with 6 years of data, a 6-year average of the birth to kindergarten survival rate. As you can see in the chart on the right, things were steadily improving in all those 6 years. So we went only with the last 3 years. So again, instead of using 97%, 98% of births surviving to kindergarten, we used the number of 104% of births survive to kindergarten. Those are in our future years. Doing that gave us 27 to 33 additional students in each of those kindergarten years in the future. Now again, if you put 20, let's say 30 students in kindergarten this year, then in the second year, those 30 students survive to first grade, and we also have 30 additional in kindergarten. We're now up by 60 students. So already we've pushed the enrollments in 2 ways. One was by using the average for the future and not the trend, which is 13 fewer, and using this 3-year ratio for births to kindergarten rather than the standard 6 years. It's very important to understand that we've pushed them in this direction. It is the conservative method in order to know that we are, in fact, going to be able to accommodate every student. We talk a lot about residential permitting. I just want to say that built in, this is the conversation that everyone has the most difficult, or the issue that people have the most difficult time in understanding, is that for the most part, the trends in the district are built into a cohort survival projection. I'm looking at a history of 6 years. People bring up, for instance, how about housing resales? Housing resales in the district have been increasing since 2007, except for 2 minor years when they went down. But again, so that's why we're having a slower, if we didn't have some resales, we would probably have even higher decreases than we're having in the projection. But we do have housing resales that have increased since the recession. And they are keeping us at a, decreasing at a slower rate built into the projection. What we want to look at in residential permitting is there any significant major subdivisions coming into the district that are going to explode the number. And that's what we looked at on a municipal by municipality basis. So that also was included, though it had little impact on the enrollments. In fact, over the next few years of the projection, we really were, in fact, only adding in 41 additional students. When you look at the overall projections, you can see that really since 2006, the enrollments have been on a steady decline. There's very little that would tell us there's any reason for that to be turning around. That decreasing enrollment may decrease at a slower rate, but it clearly will continue to decrease in the future. So in the last study, we looked at not only my numbers, but we looked at the previous consultants' numbers and compared the two. And we also made a decision to and here's the third reason. The third thing that we're going to do to be on the conservative side is we will not use the projection that I made for 5 years out, but we will use 105% of that projection. So we're increasing because of births, we're increasing because of birth to kindergarten ratio, and here we're increasing because we're going to use 105% of the projected number as our planning horizon for 5 years from now. So then we did that for, in fact, not just the district, but the grade level organizations for each of the individual schools, and those were all documented in that previous report, much like this level, and my own numbers and the consultants' numbers and the planning horizon were all there. What we arrived at the end of the report was a statement about capacity versus projection, and what we were saying at that time was that 5,339 students would be in the district at the elementary level, but that we had capacity for 6,189 students. So there was a difference there of 850 students. And of course, you're well aware of that, and that's one of the reasons, in fact, why you were considering the possible closure of the school. The other thing that you're looking at is redistricting. And you can see that here, Hillcrest highlighted in the red, you're already, in fact, over capacity, but other schools, in fact, have extra capacity, but some of them have as many as 150 seats, extra capacities, and others are as low as just, say, 50 seats. We want to equalize that throughout the district also. So there's two things that we've talked about. One is balancing the existing capacity, and the other is to look at and see, is it possible to close one school in the district and still have a very viable facilities plan. So moving ahead, I would say we did want to look at the real capacities in the school and do a document that was for public consumption and the whole purpose of being transparent. And we did find out that our capacity number wasn't 6,189, it was 6,185. So originally we were far off in the number we were using, and we will henceforth go ahead with using that 6,185 number. So that's a recap on the enrollments.
Before we proceed, let me just jump in here ever so briefly forward, because I know that over the past couple of days, you've received a couple emails from community members regarding the projection reports. One was relative to the resale market, and one was relative to individual home new construction as opposed to housing development new construction. So I think what Mr. Sundell just went through addresses the very conservative nature of the report that he has done. You heard about the birth factor, you hear about the birth to kindergarten factor, and then you hear about the 105% ratio. That 105% ratio alone builds in 255 additional students. So should we be less conservative and be more straight on with the numbers and want to instead go and look up all these individual new home constructions and look up the individual resales? My strong supposition is that we would end up with a lower projection, in fact, than what we currently have. So I think that we're actually pretty safe with where we are. And I would make the recommendation that we stick with the projection that Mr. Sundell has previously provided us with. In fact, that projection report is consistent with Decision Insight. We feel good about the projections that have been previously provided and are being reinforced here this evening. But just knowing that those couple emails have come in over the past couple of days, just want to make sure that we provided this clarification here this evening.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
Can you put those numbers back up, please?
Okay.
Sorry.
I think I saw over 100 seats in Newtown and over 100 seats in Richboro Elementary. That would translate to me to be 4 empty classrooms.
In 2021.
It's the last page. So 161 seats in Newtown were capacity. I think I know the answer because I think we've gone over this, but I think every time we show these numbers, it's important to state. So today, our 161 more kids are capable of attending Newtown Elementary?
No, that's compared with the 2021 projection, not the current projection. I'm not sure how that number would, do you see the first column, 2021?
Okay.
That's
in
5 years, if rooms were used the same, then.
That's where we're headed in 5 years. Okay. I misread that. Thank you.
And then,
But it's also not, you can't look at that and say.
That's where I was going.
Okay, Richboro has 101 capacity, and that's 4 classrooms, because that's a capacity of 101 students within the sections that already exist. So for example, if a kindergarten class has a maximum of 25 and they only have 20 in 2 sections, that would take up 10 of them.
Right. In order to do that, you'd have to fill every classroom across the district to a certain number and then move on to the next classroom. Correct. Yes, that's the point I thought should be made. Every time we make
A
it.
most excellent conversation, and we will.
I still think people, you know, if this is their first meeting, if they're hearing it, that's their supposition, is that so every time those numbers are put up, I think it's an important point for people to understand.
Dr. Foster has a comment?
oh yeah, I have a question. So when you deal with school districts in this manner, so you've outlined 3 different areas where the projection is more conservative. And you've talked about the need to do that in terms of making sure that you have excess capacity, since if you don't, your life is more difficult. But that didn't come from us. We didn't direct you to do that. That's just part of your art. Is that approach to projecting? Is that right?
Yeah. If I'm doing, the purpose of the projection doesn't matter. Sometimes when I work with a district, I might not make these adjustments because, in fact, they're not looking at facilities. Whenever you look at facilities, you always want to approach it from a conservative, because it's not going to hurt the district too badly if, in fact, they wind up with 10 extra classrooms, but it hurts them seriously, and the students and the education, if they wind up with 10 fewer. So, yes, when we're looking, and I knew from the beginning here that we were looking at a facilities approach, I wanted to go in the conservative direction.
Okay.
And yes, these were my own thoughts in regard to how to make that a conservative.
And in these situations, when you're working with a client such as us, do you ever find them saying, well, that's great, I appreciate you're wanting to give us a conservative projection, but could you give us your most probable projection?
And I usually do both.
Okay.
And that is, my projection is provided in there, and we are, however, using that 1.5%. And I also showed you what the numbers would have been if we did not use that accelerated 3-year birth to kindergarten. That is also in the projection, what they would have been if we did not use it.
Right, thanks.
I have a quick question. So I'm just going to say it out loud to make sure that I'm understanding it right. Because one of the things in the report that was a little surprising when I was going through it was when you evaluated the new housing starts, it showed an increase of, I believe, 41 new students coming in. Okay. So I just want to make sure that I've got this right. What that is actually saying is you're not actually saying that only 41 students are coming in from all this development. What you're saying is that the calculations of your projections include our historical data and other factors that allowed you to calculate how many students come in from these developments, and then you've upped it by another 41. Is that right?
Yes, yes. And the 41 were derived from using an above the historic average. So in each of the towns, I looked like what they had been building looked at a forecast for what they were going to build and made a delta between what their 6-year historic average was and what the future looked like. So it's yes to your question, and it's yes that it's only those students above the historic average.
Right, so you couldn't look at the report and say, oh, there's all this growth going on in Northampton Township, but the demographer said that that's only adding 28 students because it's 28 students above what has already been calculated into the number that you're.
Exactly, and all those averages are, again, one of those things that are built in. It's very hard to understand it, but it's in the history there. Students were accumulating for those below the average numbers, and they're built into the survival rates.
And then similarly, what is built in are these housing turnovers. Those trends contribute in.
Exactly. And again, the increase in that has been fairly consistent over the 6 years that we're using in terms of in history. So yes, they are built in. The survival rate would be different if those students hadn't been coming in, but they are.
Right, and that plus or minus 1% is where you have the realistic range. So your number is what you are predicting, but then you're accounting for a plus or minus 1%.
Well, actually plus 5% by the time we're looking at that 2021 planning horizon.
Thank you.
1% per year. All right, anybody else on this?
I think we're good. Thanks.
So the one thing that we wanted to make sure that we were accurate about was those capacities. As you can see, we were far off. We want there to be a public document, which people, again, can dive into if they want, to the extent that they want, and to know how is it that they arrived at this capacity for that school. This report is up or will be up, on the docs. It's already there. So we talked a little bit about methodology. And the primary thing that we want to look at is how are the rooms currently being used today? Because the school principals have, to the extent possible, already maximized the use of the facilities the way they're educating in that school today. So existing use is our jump-off point. And we look at how many classrooms are there at each one of the grade levels. There is, in fact, a published school policy regarding maximum class size for any one of the grade levels, and you see them listed there. So what we have taken is every standard classroom and put it in one of these categories, and we were summing up, in fact, then the capacities of all those classrooms. We also raised the question just a few minutes ago, well, I also want to know how many sections. And that's particularly important in regard to kindergarten, where some of them, in fact, are AM and PM classes, and that does give us 2 sections. At all the other grade levels, we only have 1 section, but when we begin to redistrict, we want to know that does that new redistricting capacity somehow jive with the number of sections that there are in the classroom. And that analysis will be done, and we, in fact, begin to lay the groundwork for that analysis with this report. Every report includes a floor plan. And for the most part, the steely blue are standard classrooms, and they're labeled as such. And while it's very difficult probably to read from here or even to read in a printed 8.5 by 11 document, if you go online and look at the document, you can zoom in and you can read everything that's in there, room name, room number, square footage of the class, and what the grade level is that it's currently being used. So there's not much for me to tell you, except every single floor plan, a colored floor plan, a rendered floor plan of every elementary school is in this document, and online you can get a much better handle than you can looking at it here. But what that says, in every floor plan is associated with 2 tables that look, in fact, much like this. On the table on the left are a listing by room number, room name of all of the rooms that are currently being used as standard classrooms. You can see that the first 2 lines are, in fact, for the same room. That is so that we can count it as an AM section of a kindergarten and a PM section of a kindergarten. So the number of sections in this school, in fact, is the first column on the left. And you can already see for that one classroom, we have 2 sections. The rest of them all just have 1 section. We ultimately say that down the bottom of the chart, that there are 3 kindergarten sections, 23 other sections, and a total of 26 sections at the school. When we do enrollment projections based on the scenarios, we will be looking at these numbers and making sure that, in fact, then the enrollment projection for redistricting scenarios fits in with this kind of analysis. We also then multiply those grade level classrooms by their capacity based on the district policy. That's the column on the right that says, in fact, district capacity. So that a kindergarten classroom is multiplied by 25, a first grade by 26, as per that policy thing that we looked at on page 1. And we come up with that there's 701 student capacity here at the Churchville School. Again, this is a good document to peruse online where you can actually look at this. I can't iterate each classroom, but this is the document that we've put together. On the right hand, then, it's all the other rooms in the school. So we're not leaving any room out. You can see every single room in the school that's available. Is it used as a resource room? Is it used as an office? Is it used as a music or a special room? It's all listed there, and everyone has access then to the current use, current use and how it is that we've arrived both at capacity and the number of sections.
A quick question that Dr. Foster might have one is, so we had talked about the ability to create incremental, look at Dr. Fraser now, incremental classrooms if we were to close schools. This is existing use. Are we going to get a look at and hear what the true capacity is or what the increased capacity would be as we found some of those classrooms and brought them online with investment?
You're talking about dividing walls?
Dividing walls, whatever, the +3, the -2, there's some of the other.
Yes, those 20 classrooms.
Yeah, so where does that fall in, I guess?
Yes, we can have that ready on May 22nd to show you exactly which schools, and we can even break that down to the classroom level.
Okay, so this capacity report then, that I assume fueled the numbers that created the 850 capacity, we've got some more capacity in there based on some things that we can do to find extra classrooms, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Just want to be clear.
With the price tag. Remember?
No, we have the
Those-
price tag,
yeah,
but
the price tag.
just want to make sure I knew what I was looking at. So was that your question, Dr. Foster?
That was the same question. That in some sense, this is an underestimate of our capacity.
Before investment, yeah.
Right. But some of those rooms, I mean, we all went through it. Some of those rooms require $0 investments and some like 50,000 and some 100. So, yeah.
Anybody else have a?
So you have more floor plans and more charts. It's kind of repetitive. I did want to get to this one. Let's take a look at Holland, because I think it answers a partial answer to the question that you just asked. When you see those 2 in blue in this report, they are not currently being used as standard classrooms, but it was thought in discussions with school officials that they could very, very readily and with very, very little cost be redirected to standard classrooms. And so that capacity, and there are 7 of them. I'm not sure, I would have to look to say which schools they were. But we have included 7 of these classrooms already.
That's right. There are 7 across the district that had no cost. Dr. Foster, as you just mentioned, those 7 rooms are included already. So of the 20, those 7 are included. The other 13 are not included. So that's where that breaks down.
Right. So again, I don't think I need to go through this document school by school. I need to go through it to the point where you understand what it is that we did. Any questions in that regard?
They're not colored on our copies, so if we could get a list of them, that would be great.
I'm sorry?
No, the extra classrooms are blue on your, so they're easy
You're right.
to see.
I'm looking at the same thing.
Yeah, so it's fine, not a big deal, just need a list of them at some point so I can highlight them.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
I'll just say from memory, it's 4 at South Finestone, 2 at Holland, and 1 at Richboro Elementary.
That's right.
1 at Wrightstown. 1 at Wrightstown,
Yes.
2, and the 4 at
So
South
fine
Finestone.
then. Yes.
So having done that exercise, which established and corrected by 4 our student capacities, we then wanted to move into some conceptualization of what might happen here in the district. Please underline in your minds the word concept, conceptualization. I took the district and made a concept model out of it, something that you can work with without trying to work with odd geographies and that sort of thing, which is that diagram that you see starting with Finestone at the top and moving all the way on down to Welch Churchville and Holland in the south end of the district. What's important to kind of grasp visually, and that's what it is, it's a visualization.
For the public, it's very hard to follow anything that he's saying when you don't have handouts for this kind of material. So is there anything you could do, is it online perhaps?
It will be tomorrow. That's the format that we've been following for all of our meetings.
He just has to put it in a format that's large enough for the public to see and ready to say.
Well, I think what you're going to see are visual maps on all these pages that are large enough to see in the audience, and then accompanied with Mr. Sundell's verbal description is going to be successful for this evening. And then all of these documents will be posted online tomorrow.
Thank you, I just agree.
You're welcome.
Thank you. And I'd also just reinforce what you said there, Mr. Sundell, in the words conceptual, because I received, and I'm sure the rest of my peers received, several emails today asking, are we going to see the proposed redistricting lines tonight? And the answer is no. These are simply models with groupings of students to give us some concepts around what school feeder patterns could look like, but it doesn't get down to the street level. It doesn't start to define the real specifics of redistricting. That's the hard work that happens once we've made a decision about the elementary schools. So there are no decisions to be made yet or have been made yet around specific feeder patterns.
Could we try just to increase the zoom a little bit?
Yeah, because I think the pictorial stuff, you're going to say most of the words, you can see. But at the top of the page, it says 63.3, 68.3.
Yeah.
If you make that bigger, it'll be. That helpful?
But understanding the fact that this is just geometry. What's important to bear in mind is that the proportionate sizes of these geographies are correlate probably to the district. More importantly, where a boundary of one attendance area touches another, it is represented. And there are no boundaries that touch something that is not true. If it touches, it's because there is geography there. In other words, Goodnoe does not touch Finestone. And it doesn't on the diagram either, okay? There was no easy way, in other words, to make students move in that direction because there is no shared boundary, okay? The same with, what else important is that island or the Goodnoe extra area down south of where it is represented there, and it has no shared boundary with Goodnoe. It's probably something that we want to eliminate. And the same is true of Holland with the area up in Hillcrest that really obviously should belong to Hillcrest at some point. So this is kind of a scientific drawing so that we can do the modeling that we want to do in an appropriate way and with a good understanding. So that's just basically then to understand that model shape, okay, is what this drawing is all about. We move into well, this is a reiteration of the existing model that we saw, now locating the school. And again, the schools are geographically approximate to where they might be within the district, either, on the border or well within, or deep in the heart of that sort of thing. And that's really what we look at. What we have in the upper left is an analysis of, well, that's the chart that we brought over from.
I think you never switched pages.
Is that not a Swiss page?
Yeah, no, that's the same page you were just talking about.
Just go up to the top and use the arrows. The top of the page where it says 3 out of 10. Yeah. There you go.
Okay. You're always going to school. Despite the fact that I'm using a modeling method to chart and graph some of the changes we will make, I do have supplemental maps, such as this one, that are more akin to the shapes that you're familiar with and will help you understand each one of these schemes. However, bear in mind, where I've done some choices and that sort of thing have nothing to do with student locations. They simply have to do with adjacencies, proximities, and ways of allocating land to understand the concept. When these were done, the students were not as yet mapped. They are at this point, but we're just beginning to do that right now. So this was done, again, purely on a conceptual basis. Now, doing the same thing, right? Yeah. Okay. So I got to go to 4 and go down one more. Here we go. So this is our conceptualization for what we call SK1, which is a balancing of the district, keeping all of the elementary schools open. There is kind of like nomenclature that you want to understand when you read all of these, and I'm sorry that maybe you possibly can't read all of them, but I couldn't. There's no way to make that thing even bigger. Maybe it is. Let me, for purposes of what I want to do here, I might just enlarge that. If you look here, this is the first move that we made when we're trying to model scheme 1, which is what that number 1 means. This was our first move, and we took 180 students and moved them north into Newtown. That, what used to be a Goodnoe Robin's Egg blue is now the Newtown purple. Okay? So understand that the order in which we took the steps, the number of students, and the direction of the students is mapped on the conceptual on your left-hand side.
Can you just explain why was that your starting point? And what did you evaluate and say, okay, this is move number 1?
Well, you couldn't move those students up to Goodnoe, so I know that I'm going to have to pull the students from Newtown. And once I do that, I've caused a discrepancy in Newtown, a lack of students, so it was adjacent, and I just decided that I would move those up to Newtown. Swap them out. Theoretically, I'm sort of swapping them out at the same time as I'm doing the balancing. If you'll notice, I'm moving 180 up to Newtown, but I'm only moving in step 2 at the upper right-hand corner of Newtown. Step 2, I'm only moving then 121 students into Goodnoe from Newtown. And that was the balancing that I had to do because of geography, and because there was no way I could get those 180 students over to Goodnoe in any kind of semblance of a contiguous geography. Because Goodnoe is only, in fact, sharing borders with Newtown, I had to do that 1-2 punch on all the schemes. Okay, there's no other place for Goodnoe to get students but from Newtown.
And so basically, in other words, your first approach was to eliminate that island, is what we call it, where it's a non-contiguous boundary.
Let's say it works to do that, yes. I don't know that it was my highest priority, but it was a necessary one in each of the scenarios.
Dr. Fraser, sorry, Mrs. Brooks, you have to answer your question. Dr. Fraser, is it worthwhile, one of the kind of the guidelines this board provided was to balance the north and south
part of the district. So in these scenarios, and this graph isn't a great articulation relative to what we see when we'll see the real map, but in these scenarios, it's assumed that the numbers coming out of Richboro would be the ones that would go into the north? Or haven't you made that determination yet?
We would have to make that determination based upon status quo. With Richboro staying in the south, we're still imbalanced.
Right.
So whereas the other two scenarios that we're going to see this evening, we are pretty much 50-50 balanced.
Right.
So that's a decision that we would have to make in terms of Richboro, because we're still imbalanced based upon these numbers.
Yep.
So having moved the Goodnoe Island, if you will, up to Newtown over to Goodnoe, we now have Goodnoe balanced. My third step, though, was to also make sure that Feinstein was balanced, which means fill it to the capacity that's the equity capacity within the district. So I need to move 33 students up to Feinstein in order to get it in a balanced position. All of the steps then follow on. I'm not sure that we want to stay here tonight and go through each step by step, but then because we've moved some Newtown students over to Wrightstown in order to get Wrightstown up without drawing them up from the south. What we still do, we have to bring some students up from Welch and from Richboro. So that does go on and on that way.
Right, and for the benefit of the public at the bottom, okay, you're going to that, you've got it clearly mapped out there that show those moves.
Yeah, so at the bottom of each of the sheets that show these schemes, you can see that there is 11, I think it is, 11 steps to this one. They're all mapped there with that symbolism that we used and show us the step-by-step procedure for each one. In the bottom right, then, we have what the balanced enrollment would be when everybody is at the same percentage of capacity. And it shows you in that scheme one, which was just balancing throughout all 10 elementary schools, how many students had to move in order to make. This is a big number, a very important number that everybody wants to know. And in this case, it's about 14% of the students moved just to get balanced capacity in all the schools.
And that's before we get to the science and the art of redistricting. So
yeah.
There's.
This is all numerical, by the way. It's very easy for me to move one student in a mathematical model, so I can come out with 100% balancing. When we get to the geography, and I'm doing it neighborhoods and streets, it won't be so 100% on the mark. Okay. That's why you model first. You kind of have an idea of what it is you're trying to do.
Ms. Thomas, you have a question?
Target.
So I thought that's really all you were doing is making boundaries more sensible. And
That's
balancing
what we
the
will
schools.
ultimately do.
And balancing the school's capacity. You're not.
Yes.
So all he's doing is redistricting right now. You haven't presented closing a school.
No, this is redistricting.
Just
No,
balancing.
This says the way I read it, that if we don't close a school, and
We just
before we get to
rebalance.
balancing north and south, at a minimum, call it 15% of our population is going to be impacted by redistricting. Once you talk about
I would-
balancing north
Without
and
closing a
south,
school,
it gets bigger once you talk about if we, so that's kind of a baseline impact.
So again, this is something that needs to be examined and reviewed, and online, again, you can get a much better picture. As I said, I would give you a map that I don't consider to be anywhere near accurate, but again, it's something that's there that's worthwhile looking, and I have taken geographies that belong to somebody. If you look at number one now, that was the Goodnoe Island, if you will, and now it's purple and shaded with Newtown. And you begin to see a new shape, if you will, to the Newtown district. If you look at, I guess it's item number 3 up there, you can see that some portion of the Wrightstown district has been moved up to the Finestone district. And on and on. So if you look at the colorations on this map, you begin to get a feel for the new shape of SK1. Now, SK2 in this report is closing Wrightstown. I'd rather just keep the whole page open because we don't need to look at the specifics. That's something that everyone will need to do, looking, I think, online and that sort of thing. But Wrightstown closes, so you can just look over there and you can see a third of it has been moved up to Finestone, a third is moved down to Richboro, and well, it needs to be a third, but those numbers are a little bit over a third. And probably about 28%, I think of it, has been moved over to Newtown. That, along with those 1-2 punches for Goodnoe and Newtown that I always spoke of, they need to be present because Goodnoe is not contiguous to anything but Newtown, make up the first 5 steps, and everything else just kind of cascades out, balancing the bottom of the district after we make those big moves of dividing Wrightstown between Finestone, Goodnoe, and Newtown. So that's what SK2 does. And in this scheme, just moving Wrightstown alone is 3.4% of the students in the district. The total on this move is 15.5%. So it's not too different from the 13, 14 we were talking about, plus in this case, all the Wrightstown students obviously get moved.
Mr. Sundell, can you zoom in and just show the Wrightstown portion so folks can see the numbers of students there, please?
So,
you want to go all the way down, right?
Just showing the Wrightstown.
well, 71 are moving, you can see them here, 71 are moving up to Finestone, 48 down to Richboro, and 62 up to Newtown. I'm sorry? For move, this table, or are you talking about over?
Right there. The bottom right?
Yes.
Jenny?
There's a lot of information, and it's conceptual, and it is all laid out here. And I certainly encourage everyone tomorrow to take a much longer view at analyzing what's happening and where things are headed.
I'm sorry, Dr. Fraser, as we get into presentations for next week and kind of the wrap up, I think it'd be helpful when we look at these scenarios to show the capacity versus the new enrollment, so we can kind of see what capacity the schools are at. You know, I kind of did the back envelope math, so roughly 94 to 95% capacity at each of the schools based on some of these scenarios. Mm-hmm. But I think that might be helpful for everybody just to see that out there when we get to it.
Good
and then, you know, designate, does this come with a cost or doesn't it come with a cost? Because ultimately, I think what we've got to get comfortable with is we've got to leave capacity in the district. It's just what's our tolerance for capacity versus a closure.
Right.
I would also add that perhaps we should consider putting the presentation out ahead of the meeting, because this is very challenging. We have a lot of people in the audience tonight, and this is extremely challenging for people to understand.
Or have handouts.
Or have handouts. I don't care either way. But if it's not going to be in PowerPoint where it's clean, crisp, clear, it needs to be in a format that people can understand.
So then a glimpse more on a geographic map basis of what that second scheme was when we closed Wrightstown. Now you can see that the big area is being divided up primarily between the 3 other schools.
You just carved that up by area, right? You didn't, don't read any streets or anything into that?
No.
Okay. Just want to reiterate that.
And this is SK3, which was closure of Rolling Hills. So you see much more activity down where the Rolling Hill School used to be, but it's the same thing, except now what is happening probably for the first time. The whole Wrightstown School has been shifted south in terms of its attendance area, and much of it is still up in Finestone. And we kind of see, all the other, there's one more extra move. It takes strong moves to accomplish this one. And everybody gets touched in some fashion, every one of the attendance areas. So it is the most complex, because Rolling Hills is kind of in the center of the district. It's the most complex of the moves. Again, you do have your table showing all 12 steps of the move. Capacity statement, in this case, we're now at 31%. It involves the movement of the most students to close this school. And finally, last look, if you will, of what that might look like if we were to close that Rolling Hill School in redistrict in terms of color coding.
And then Dr. Fraser, again for next week, as I looked at this map, obviously the big piece, and I'm sure it's on lots of people's minds as they look at these maps, is what's that mean to me in terms of a child's time on the bus relative to where I am now? And if ascending pattern changes, so I would assume that we're going to get a good piece of that, because I look at three things just that doesn't make any sense for the existing student, but is more comparable with what is happening in other parts of the district. So I think that's the real, before you get caught up in this, understand that we've got to understand the transportation impacts on this. This is just math around students and buildings, right?
So where we do move from here further along is we do look at where are the students located on certain streets in certain areas. And if I look, say in section 2 there on this map, which is a piece of Newtown that is in fact moving to Goodnow, because I did already take a peek myself. There's not enough students in there to account for how many I have to move. It was a poor choice in terms of me doing the conceptual. It was probably a good choice in terms of making it fit and having a regular area. But when I look there's not enough students in that area. I already know it. Those are the kind of things that we'll begin to look at in detail to match now our expectations with a real geography of neighborhoods and streets and students. So that's how that.
And this is for Dr. Fraser. One of the things that I'm hoping will come out on the 22nd then is how we're going to balance the middle schools based on whatever we've done here. I think I heard you say that already, but.
As you look at these numbers that are up here, SK2 and SK3, it would happen naturally.
Okay.
In fact, the percentages in SK2 are 49% in the north, 51% in the, 49% in the south, 51% in the north. Okay. So that would just naturally feed up into the secondary schools. And SK3 are 50%, 50%. The challenge for us with these particular models with SK1 specifically is that we have 54% in the south and 46% in the north. So we would need some refinements done with SK1.
And when you're quoting that math, while there's no decisions made, that math is based on Richboro shifting to the north based on kind of
no, that's Richboro staying in the south. So that's
in 2 and 3.
I'm sorry. Yes, 2 and 3.
I want to make sure I know what
yes.
Yes,
that's based upon Richboro shifting to the north.
So it gets a little bit more tricky if we decide not to close the school.
That's right.
Not that there's a reason one way or the other.
Right.
Any more questions or comments from the board, Dr. Foster?
Yeah. So this redistricting, it's another year out, right?
2018-19.
18-19, and then the population projections
we were citing were from 2021. So, I mean, that's close, right? But the presumably these boundaries are going to be easier to live with, like the next year and the year later, as population is expected to drop. The first year might be the most difficult year. Is that right? Something like that? Does that make sense to you?
I think it's fair.
Okay. And then I don't have much experience with what districts normally do. So one of the criticisms of Council Rock is that we hadn't redistricted in, I don't know, 15, 20 years. It's been a while. And we talk about the idea of redistricting more frequently. I would assume that if a district does that, there will be folks that are more at risk of frequent redistricting, neighborhoods that are more at risk than other neighborhoods. The ones on the edges are going to be more at risk. And what is that, if a district wants to move to that culture of more frequent redistricting so that there are balanced classrooms, you don't get uncomfortable in schools, is that culturally acceptable? I mean, do the districts actually do that? Because we haven't, so it would be new to us.
We haven't. The answer is yes. Now, the norm for districts is typically around every 7 years or so, give or take. I know of a district in Montgomery County that will do a spot redistrict every single year. So that's their culture. I would not recommend that we do that. But it depends on the culture of the place. But in a district of our size, redistricting, doing a district-wide redistrict around every 6, 7, 8 years or so, probably should be the norm, should be the culture of our district.
And then, I mean, the neighborhood boundaries get so complicated. Is it actually possible that in the future, because we normally think redistricting, very formal process, we roll out, we have big meetings and all this, but the reality is there may be little cul-de-sacs or little pieces of families moving in and out where it almost doesn't matter. No one would notice. It wasn't like there was a strong tradition. Does that make sense? I don't know if that kind of thing happens where we make a big deal out of it, but maybe some fluidity is almost invisible in practice. I don't know.
And some of it depends on how much capacity we have. It depends on which way the movement's moving, up or down.
Right.
Because once we get too tight in our schools, then that's when it becomes problematic.
Right.
And it'll force our hand.
Yeah. Well, thanks.
You're welcome.
Any other comments or questions? Okay, Dr. Fraser, where are we going next?
I'm going to come up and join you, and I think it's time for board discussion on what timeline looks like and the potential of adding a meeting and the possibility of a June timeline.
Okay. So I guess I'll kick that off again. This has been a building process, and we're at the stage where we've seen some redistricting concepts in terms of buildings and students. We have not yet seen the transportation piece, which will be introduced on the 22nd of May. In order to give the public some closure, because we don't want to do any work in the summer. The question becomes.
Not because we don't want to do it.
Well, it's not because we don't want to do it. We'd love to do it, but we want to ensure that there's full visibility and awareness to what we're doing during the summer. But I think just to give people some closure as to what we're doing, if they want to get a sense for if the board feels like we're getting to a place where folks can start to make some decisions about what we're going to do, take one more meeting, which would introduce the transportation piece, as well as, to Dr. Fraser's point, really sum up all of the meetings that we've seen to talk about the true impact of each potential move. So regardless, we're redistricting to balance the north and south. That could include closing a middle school, will include closing a middle school, could include one of two elementary schools as we look at it today. So really flushing out those three options in their totality to take a look at what sending areas could change to, what the cost would be, both capital and operating, what the savings might be, what the costs that we don't have to spend now could be, take a look at real pros and cons to community and staff to really give us a full picture of what either one of these scenarios would do, and try to provide that information all of the meeting on the 22nd. And then because we are ending school 13th with graduation, the goal would be to have a meeting prior to that. Wanted to get the board's appetite to see if you feel like we'll be able to, or we should schedule a meeting to see if we can get to the decision point. So why don't I just go around the table and see where everybody kind of is.
We entered this capital planning process 3 or 4 years ago because of declining enrollment and aging infrastructure. And that's been where we're at all along. Those haven't changed. I think some of the information that came up tonight is a little bit new in that we have these estimated appraisals, and consistent with the experience of other school districts, you don't make a lot of money by offloading properties. That's not how you face something like the pension crisis. So again, just as it was at the very beginning, for me, that focus on operating costs, that's where when you can save $1 million a year, year after year after year, it becomes very impactful. And so that next meeting is important to see, because what we don't know is what do those redistricting look like in a quantitative way. We have this first model, but we don't know how many classroom teachers we don't need because of the consolidation, and therefore how much cheaper the district is to run. That is a really important piece that will come out at that next meeting. So that's great to help inform our decisions. I would favor us going after that meeting and giving the community some closure as to whether we're going to close a school, and if so, which one. I think that's incredibly important because we're all out there hearing people not knowing what's what, and it's driving some people crazy. But also, aside from that emotional piece, we have financial problems that were envisioned years ago that were the rationale for launching this entire multi-year journey, and those are still there and pressing. So got to keep going. Can't slow down.
Dr. Foster, Dr. Thorward?
I don't think, after the May 22nd meeting, if we don't have the information we need, I don't think we ever will. So I'm in favor. Let's wrap this up, make a decision, and move forward. So yeah, before graduation, I'm good with it.
Mr. Butler?
Well, I don't know what we're not going to know after May 22nd, and that's the hard part. I've been a proponent of doing the redistricting first and then deciding where what elementary schools to close, if any. So, listen, I love the idea of expediency, and I think it's fine to say we're not going to know, or we're going to have all the information we're going to need, but we just don't know. We don't know what the other questions are going to be. People from the community are going to bring up questions and things that we haven't thought about. So this is a big move, and I want to make sure that we look at every single angle and just hurrying to close the school. And I think that we should give a lot of thought to the effect on the communities, and I think we are. So I'm in favor of that idea let's put this to bed and let's let people know where they're going to be sending their kids and what schools we're going to be working with. But again, I don't want to close. I'm just going to use Wrightstown as an example. I don't want to close Wrightstown and then find out we made a mistake now that we don't have those rooms to put those kids in when we look at redistricting. Again, it just doesn't make sense to me. I will comment that Dr. Foster, you said, and you've said before, that we don't make money offloading properties, but I would be very happy if this district owned less properties that we can spend money building on, right? And I just go back to selling Richboro Middle or closing Richboro Middle to save $24 million, and then seeing a proposal to spend $22 million to move our administration. And a training facility and some other programs in there. So those kind of discussions make me very nervous because this district tends to spend money very quickly and in very large amounts. So I think it's issues like that with Goodnoe Elementary, Holland Elementary, in my opinion, Newtown and Holland Middle. We get in these large projects and we finance them, and it sounds good because low interest rates, and suddenly we're $150, $160 million deep, and we have to pay those bills. And we're really paying bills for, as I said before, what's done in the past, and future boards are going to have to pay bills for what we do now. So I think we have to be very mindful, and rushing makes me concerned. Doug, just while I have the microphone, can you remind me if we ever did get the information about what it would take to build onto Wrightstown to bring it up to capacity with other schools? Did you give me those figures? Okay, very good. Do you have them available easily?
I'll email them again.
Yeah, or just come back to us and there was a question I got from the community about it, so maybe if we can just.
What's your question, Zach?
Well, knowing now that we can build on Wrightstown, right? The cost to build it out and add the classrooms that would bring it up to capacity is, to some of the other schools.
For Wrightstown?
Wrightstown. You don't have to tell me right now, maybe at the end.
I can tell you right now if you want to know.
Very good, thank you.
Sure. If you were to, and again, taking into consideration at Wrightstown, replacing the 5 modulars that were on the site with fixed classrooms, 5 to match what was there, so 1-to-1, which allows us to utilize the existing sewer treatment plant that we have on the site without any impact. An addition of a gym to achieve parity with the other elementary schools. Kitchen, cafeteria, small addition, knowing the size of that, the condition of the kitchen. Again, this is, as anything else, a 10,000-foot look without detailed programming.
Sure.
But my best guess at what we need at that facility. Enlarging the boiler room slightly for new equipment and to sister what's there as we move forward with an occupied building at the same time. It includes environmental allowance to remediate the rest of any of the environmental items that could be behind walls, above ceilings, things that aren't in the open. An allowance for site improvements, an allowance for some minimal roof work as we put additions on and new systems. The big thing at Wrightstown Elementary School that we also have to consider is we will absolutely have to provide a fire protection system at that facility. We're on a well there, so we would have to put a large storage tank, water storage tank on the site, preferably buried and not above ground like a big train oil tanker that you would have. So it'd be a water tank with pumps and a new electrical service entrance to that facility, because from the street to the building, we're kind of maxed out with what the electrical service is there. Whereas some of our other projects, we have enough capacity in the building to just put new equipment from that point in. So we'd have a little bit more spending there. Assuming all of the fees and contingencies across the board, you're looking at about an $18.2 million project.
So let me ask you this, Mark. That's a good question. I had asked a similar one a while back. As we look at scenarios next week, and I think we probably owe this to the people at Wrightstown. We've already impacted.
Right?
What's that?
Next month.
Next month. Sorry, did I say next week?
Yes.
Sorry. We've already impacted that school to, from a K-4 standpoint. And if you look at any of these models, the community's impacted significantly, because it's going to be moved, roughly half to a third is moving under either scenario. So there's impact. I think one of the scenarios we should run is, in addition to having the model where Wrightstown stays open, that it stays open as a K-6 with those adjustments, to understand that as a choice, in addition to potentially leaving it open as a K-4.
I would say too, though, and Doug, I don't know how you do this, but I I have to believe that community would be perfectly fine with the cafeteria gym situation that they've been living with forever and a day. I mean, is there a way, so that's a global cost, which is the question that was asked, what do you do to bring it up to the same level of the other schools? And then, but, can we break that down? I don't mean this minute, but in terms of, that's a wish list of, in an ideal world, I don't think so the systems, obviously, I get, there are things that have to be done. There are things that could be done over a period of time with planning, presumably.
Sure, I could easily break out what the cost deductions would be, kind of like an alternate cost, if you eliminated some of those components. If you said, don't build the gym, don't build the 5 classrooms, don't build the addition to the kitchen. I think the kitchen is something you may have to do just because the equipment's obsolete.
Mm-hmm.
When you put a new kitchen in, you got to work within the new design standards. But at any rate, I can.
Yes, if we can build that when we
I can
figure out
back
what the
them up.
format for the presentation next month is going to be, we can get that view and just make it consistent with all the other scenarios so everybody understands it with the breakout. Mr. Byer?
Yeah, I think that's a fair point, and I think it's the most fair to the community because we keep saying how small Wrightstown is, and it doesn't have the capacity. And for many years, at least the first year and a half that I was on the board, we heard we can't build on Wrightstown anymore, and then we learned that we can. So we have to look at it in parity with everything else, and that would be helpful. And I think including it is a perfect suggestion. Thank you.
And Ms. Brooks, before I come to you, you raised another good point, Mark, about the redistricting before closing. I want to be really clear about what the timeline might be coming out of a June meeting. At the June meeting, if this board were in a position to provide direction to the administration, that's what it would be. It would be direction to the administration that we would have status quo or potentially close one of the elementary schools. The formal hearing and formal votes for that would take place as we started the new year in the fall, as we came back in, but it would enable the administration to start the redistricting process, engage the community in the redistricting process, or at least get ready during the summer to engage the community. So we can hit our timelines for that. And then as we see that come along, Mark, maybe that, starts to help you get more comfortable or at least, it's similar timeline to what that we followed at Richboro, if you will, provide a direction, continue to work down a path, then held a hearing, we'll hold a vote. So, a hearing and a vote wouldn't come till theoretically the fall. And that's just assuming that a majority of the board was aligned against one direction next month. So anyway, just want everybody to be aware of what we're talking about. Ms. Brooks.
So I think you're looking at me for.
Back to the question around the June meeting, yes.
So first, I just want to say that, I can appreciate how difficult it is for the people in the audience because it's a lot of information, it's hard to see. So I want to echo that going forward, whatever we can do to make it easier for the public to follow along, especially because if we have these 2 meetings ramped up, one right after the other, right at the end of the school year, we want to make sure that everybody has an opportunity to digest and ask their questions.
I got Wendy's point loud and clear.
For me, I have very much appreciated this process because I think all of our meetings have very deliberately addressed all the major concerns that we have and what we need to consider to make a decision. As we focus in onto May 22nd, understanding as we apply everything we learned from each successive meeting, what kind of efficiencies we're going to get, which was the target of this whole process, to improve our efficiencies. So we will see that information in May. We will get a review of the transportation impact, which is critical to know that we can make the moves that would yield us those efficiencies. And a review of a cost analysis of these scenarios to understand the financial impact, which helps fully understand how our operating costs are affected by our decisions, which will help us understand going forward, what do we have available as a district to invest in our curriculum and to invest in our students so that we're not spending more on running our district than we need to. So for me, it does feel like that this process will yield us enough information so that we can make this decision in June. And the reality is if there are board members that don't feel that way, then I guess we're going to stay status quo, because what doesn't change is our implementation date of the fall of 2018. Those buildings are going to open. We need to fill them. We need to accomplish certain things regardless of some of these other decisions. And so I'm grateful that Dr. Fraser has made this recommendation to not leave it open. Maybe it'll be at the end of this school year, or maybe it'll be at the beginning of next school year, because I do think it is in everyone's best interest if we are able to make this decision. If we have the information we need, we are all better served in multiple ways, in terms of time to better plan, in terms of how we communicate, in terms of how the school communities and PTOs who are planning for things next year, who do so much work over the summers. This is very helpful. The one thing that I haven't heard, that I get a lot of public questions about, that I would like to see addressed more specifically, I guess in May or maybe even sooner, is a better explanation of how the redistricting committee is going to work. I know that you've said that there will be representation from all 15 schools, but I think it's sort of vague. What will that look like? When will they meet? When will you be asking for participation? I think that's a very, very big question, because we can say whatever we want as we come to this conclusion in June, but the reality is, no matter which scenario we go through, close one school, close another, don't close any schools, that redistricting piece is coming. That is the part that is impacting the anxiety of our students, our parents, our staff. And so if we could just give a little bit more information about what that would be like, what that committee is going to look like, understanding that I guess the ground rules will be set later, but just something a little bit more, because it's been very vague, I think that would be helpful.
Ms. McKessie? Okay.
We can call whatever we want in June.
Yeah. Yeah.
It really is the bottom line. So
Yeah.
I understand the request, and I understand the administration's thoughts on that, and I understand the need for decision-making so that people are at peace and we are doing this work as transparently as possible. But in the end, it does come down to if 5 of us are ready to go in June or not.
Yep.
So I'm going to be the lone dissenter. I feel like there are 3 weeks from May 22nd till June 13th. One of those weeks we're missing a day. And I feel like we have a lot of information, but that each of these communities should have an opportunity to be heard singularly and on their own with their questions. I feel like after May 22nd, if that's kind of the summation of all our information, we should then take it. We should give the community 2 weeks to digest it. We should have a meeting at Rolling Hills. We should have a meeting at Wrightstown, and we should listen to what the community says just about their community, things that we didn't think of. I'm not sure that we won't, as board members, having sat through every one of these meetings, I'm not sure I won't have all my questions answered, but I don't know what I didn't think of. And having been through redistricting before, and having been on the side that by the time I got to ask my questions, I was basically told decisions are made, I think that would be an improvement this time for Council Rock. That didn't happen last time. So I'd like to see it where there's a Rolling Hills night and a Wrightstown night. Those are really the 2 communities we're talking about. Listen to those communities, and then I'd like to come back and decide. If that could all happen in June, I'm not opposed to June. It's certainly not going to happen before school closes, but I would like to make sure we hear from them. And the people I'm talking to, granted, my immediate community doesn't go to either one of these schools, although fringes of it, they are weary of this process that has taken us, and they haven't paid attention to their own admittance, and there's not much we can do about that. But those 2 communities have the potential, unless of course everybody says do nothing, then maybe that's not necessary. But I think that that would be in our best interest. If the timing works great for June, I don't think there's any real reason that redistricting bus runs can't be run in 3 scenarios over the summer, and we can't do it in September. But it feels that we have a budget to pass. It feels like a lot, not just for the board, but for the administration closing school. I'll leave it to you guys to talk about planning. But personally, I would like to see a night in each of those communities or here and have it be about that particular community. And they might be short meetings. Maybe we won't get a lot of people from one community or the other. But I think we need 20-second, let them have time to understand that information, whatever's discussed, and then a public meeting on that topic, listen to the community, and then we'll have done everything we can do to come back to make a decision. So that's my feeling.
Thank you, it's a good comment. Dr. Fraser, do you have anything else? Okay.
Point of clarity.
Yeah, Mike and then Dr. Foster.
I heard redistricting and how hard it's going to be. We hired a professional demographer to assist, and they're on the payroll to do the yeoman's work for this, correct?
That's right.
Okay.
Dr. Foster.
You're not sitting up at midnight with the
We're not
midnight
doing
oil,
the
are you?
cramps.
No, but I will tell you, I mean, and I think Mr. Sundale's work speaks for itself.
Right.
That said, it has not been a hands-off approach on our end.
Understood.
So,
Understood.
and it will not, it will continue to be very much a hands-on approach.
But he will do the heavy lifting for you.
Yes, that's right.
The math.
That's right.
The numbers.
That's right.
I wanted to get a little bit of clarity on the Wrightstown build-out and the redistricting, the representation of the redistricting scenario. So if we add classrooms to that school, we may, given that we have 22 classrooms, you get into this capital thing. So we know that some of those classrooms require money to capture. Well, you got to compare that money versus the money to get these new Wrightstown classrooms. So, knowing what that looks like. But we could easily find ourselves in an overcapacity situation where, obviously if you add on to Wrightstown, it may even be the case that even if you close Rolling Hills, there's still too much capacity in the system. I don't know. So that would be something, given these other classrooms and how easy they are to capture. But one of the huge anxieties I have is Sulphine-Stone. That's a school that desperately needs renovation. We're not done with our capital program. We've worked our way through a lot of schools. Sulphine-Stone, a really huge school, a really old school, it needs work. It does, and it's a big deal to take that on. And some of our other schools need work as well. And so, unfortunately, our capital program it has to keep rolling along. And so we have to keep our eye on whether we're over capacity and where we're spending our capital dollars and what bang we're getting for that buck. So that's all.
No, I think that's a fair question. That's exactly why I suggested that we add all the comparables with that look, because I think it's really important that we give that community, that view and give ourselves the ability to make that decision. So we'll stack them all up the same way so you can, kind of have an apples to apples comparison. We all can and can make a decision.
Yeah, I do. I wasn't planning on commenting on this evening, but I'm looking at this PDF document that's posted online around the 20 classrooms. So if you look at that document, it's color-coded both yellow and green. What's in green are the 7 classrooms that we spoke of earlier this evening that don't cost any money. So those are already built into the school capacities that Mr. Sundell spoke of this evening. What's color-coded in yellow are another 7 classrooms, just ironically happens to be 7, that are all the movable partitions that I spoke of the very first evening when I presented. And I spoke of those rooms that evening where we could combine 2 smaller groups of students into the same space. And I spoke of it that evening as that would not be an ideal educational practice, if you recall that. I stand by that statement, and I throw that out there again this evening because we've already accounted for 7 of these 20 spaces. That leaves us with 13. I would personally, my own analysis, think long and hard about another 7 of these spaces as not being ideal from an educational standpoint for students. If we need to take them, that's one thing, but if we don't need to take them, I would not. So we've already accounted for 7. There's 7 additional rooms. So potentially that only leaves us with 6 additional rooms. So again, you can, it's on that landing page. It's on the Master Capital landing page. There's 20 classrooms. You'll see them where the green ones are the ones that we've already accounted for. The yellow ones are the ones I'm speaking of. They, for the most part, say movable partition panels beside it, cost figure of $3,500. Because that does not represent an educational best practice. It blocks sight lines from one group to the other group. It does not block the audio from one group to the other group. It's not something that, as superintendent, I would necessarily recommend. So as we're getting closer and closer to the end of the process, I feel more and more comfortable stating that, I think, as a recommendation.
Okay. All right, so with that, we'll move to public comment. If I could ask Mr. Taylor, Dr. Elliott, since we don't have Ms. Rice here, if there's any significant questions or suggestions that come up, if you could just capture those for FAQ, make sure we get those.
Yeah, that's a good suggestion, but just so the board does know that Ms. Rice will be taking minutes on this evening based upon the replay.
Oh, good. Hopefully she's somewhere she can hear everything. Sorry. Nancy, that was for you. So we're going to take public comment now. We're going to give you 3 minutes. I'll give you the high sign when you're there. Please remember that we're on TV here. Also be respectful of your neighbors to not be too repetitive. We want to hear from everybody. We want to hear everything. And we just ask you to line up there and take comment through the evening. Just remember, we might not respond if it's an easy yes or no question, perhaps, but if not, certainly everything is recorded as well as being documented online in FAQ. And please remember to say your name and town. I'm sorry.
Thank you. Stephanie Berry at Terrace, Wrightstown. I have 2 points, and the first one to you is to Mr. Block and to Mr. Fraser. The capacity that we saw tonight that keeps being quoted is a capacity at 100%, which I believe we've said is not feasible because you can't fill every classroom, every grade to capacity, et cetera. So as we know from previous conversations on this discussion, ideally, capacity should be somewhere in the 85 to 90% range. I mean, this is some of the literature and some of the previous discussions and looking at other school districts. But I would like to ask the 2 of you if you might be willing to consider what is Council Rock School District's view on what our target capacity is, because I find these figures a little bit misleading, and I hear Dr. Foster saying that we are well below capacity. And so the capacity number, we almost need another number that's almost like feasible capacity, because 100% is not a way to run a school. I know that Jenny Schottmiller has data by year for what we've run at, and she just mentioned to me that 88% is where we're currently at. And so if that would be helpful, I'm sure she could give you some of that. The second point that I want to make, in addition to if you would consider outlining a real capacity number, the second one is I want to just make mention of the letter that was sent to Dr. Fraser by the Wrightstown Township Supervisor about the number of homes that were not accounted for in the Sundance report. And just to refresh your memory, what was not accounted for in that residential property assessment were tracts of land that would be minor subdivisions or individual parcels. And when you look at those figures, there are 100 pieces of land that are planned for development that haven't been accounted for. So that's 100 single family homes, and they're not age restricted. In addition, amongst those townships, Wrightstown, Upper Makefield, Northampton, and Newtown, in discussion right now are 463 parcels of land to be built out. And so I would suggest that when you look at, again, this is over the next 3 years, 563 potential single-family homes at 0.75 children per home, that you have a number, if my math is generally right, that's about 7% of your elementary school capacity. So while I appreciate that we've tried to take this into account and the conservatism, I would advocate that perhaps you would like to look and work with the individual townships on some of that data to more thoroughly do this analysis. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephanie. Just one comment for the public. I certainly cannot dictate the board's perspective on what the appropriate capacity is. Please send us all your information. I'd love different points of data to make my own perspectives, but I think we each individually have to figure out what we think is right and what we're comfortable and the trade-offs there. So just so everybody's clear, that's not a role that I would play as chair.
Could I ask a clarification point? So that we do use the capacity number frequently, and it came up at a prior meeting. I think we usually use the 90%. We don't ever use the 100%. That's not what we define as the capacity of the school.
Yeah, I don't want to take public comment off track, but I think
right. It's just
past meetings we've said we need capacity. We've agreed we need significant capacity in the district, so we don't get too tight. I don't think we've ever landed.
Well, no, I'm just saying whenever the administration says what the capacity of a school is, it's not the 100% figure. It's a 90% figure. Is my memory throughout this whole process. Just putting it out there.
All right, we're going to take the next public comment, please.
Hello, my name is Kim Williams, and I'm from Holland. I'm the treasurer of the Rolling Hills Home and School Association. I'm speaking tonight based on my experience in this position. I would like to convey to the board that delaying a decision as to whether or not Rolling Hills or Wrightstown will be kept open or closed has a tremendous impact on our financial decisions. We cannot set a budget for next year until we know the disposition of our school. Each year we fundraise to provide various things for our students and teachers, many of which are for the advancement of our students' education. Some of our recent contributions to Rolling Hills were a new sound system in the gym, an iPad cart, and Chromebooks that the home and school provided. All of our big expenditures were to better our school experience. In recent years, we have made sure that these things were transferable to other schools, knowing that we don't know if we're staying open or not, should we need to move them to other schools. These are just a few of the things for which we have raised money and provided to our students. But lack of clarity about the timeline drastically impacts our ability to fundraise, plan for wise investments, accurately budget, and be good stewards of our money. In addition, if our organization will need to be dissolved, there are legal processes that we will need to begin, and that will severely impact our operations as well. I am hoping that the board will consider the financial impact that this has on all of the Council Rock Elementary School PTOs, PTAs, home and school associations, clubs, and budgets, because every one of them, if you're dividing the students up all over, will be affected in their home and school budgets. We all do our budgetary planning many months or even a year in advance, and the sooner we all have clarity, the better we can plan and provide continuity to our schools. I, as a committed volunteer, parent, and member of this community, am asking that you do not delay your decision so that all of our organizations can make the decisions necessary to continue to provide for the students and the teachers in our schools. Thank you.
Thank you.
Scott McBurney, Wrightstown Township. Want to talk a few things. I was going to get into some detail with Sundance's report for the projections. He kind of clarified some things tonight that weren't necessarily all that clear last time. But one of the major things I had kind of an issue just going through his report, which he did clarify tonight. There was none of the things that he was talking about as far as his methods, his assumptions, kind of his conclusions. There's no written description of that in the report, at least that I pulled offline. So from the community standpoint, without having some of the more detailed discussions in that report. It's a little tough to follow where he was coming from. Because one of the issues that I was going to bring up is he primarily focused on birth rates and additional children coming into the district as a result of new development. He made that clear tonight that he is taking into account, to some degree, real estate turnover. However, the way that I feel that he's taking into account, while probably suitable from a crystal ball perspective, he did say he's using historic data from the past 6 years on that. We also have to keep in mind that over the last 6 years, we have been coming out of the deepest recession since the Great Depression. People were not moving, people were not having children, things were very depressed in an abnormal situation that we don't have any historic data for. So to use those as an average and project that forward moving into 2020, as we're starting to hear the housing market is heating up, the real estate is booming, I think is a little bit, it's not exactly as correct as we want. I know I've heard a couple board members say, so best case scenario, we're looking at a flat enrollment. Maybe, maybe not. This isn't, we have to keep in mind too, this is not an actual steady and fast, this is what's going to happen. Just wanted to make that point. Second point with what Mr. Sundell presented tonight on the second scenario with Wrightstown being the closure. I feel there needs to be discussion if it's an assumed that Richboro Elementary comes into a north sending school and part of Wrightstown goes down there and Wrightstown gets divvied up into 3 different schools. There needs to be a pretty significant discussion on that. Richboro is not really in the center of its take district. And to bring Wrightstown into it, it's on the south side of Richboro. And anybody that lives down there knows if you're in there in the middle of the day to try to get from Wrightstown to the south side of Richboro, let's just say it's not a quick trip. That's a pretty significant impact on parents and families in Wrightstown. And I don't agree with that decision. We need a school that's closer to where our area is. Third final point, I want to agree with Mrs. Thomas as far as the June meetings go. I feel as though there needs to be some kind of that overall wrap up, and whether that's a discussion here or you take it to Rolling Hills and Wrightstown. At the end of these meetings, we have our chance to say our points, but you guys never get to deliberate or discuss what these points are. So to have kind of that wrap up discussion for all of us would be very helpful. Thank you.
Great, thank you.
Jenny Schottmiller, Newtown Borough. Four things. One, if you look historically back to 2006 and you just look at what classrooms did you have, so not looking at capacity or how many empty classrooms, but if you look at the classrooms and how full were those classrooms, you have never, as a district, from 2006 up till now, 2017, had an elementary classroom capacity over 88%. So we talk about 90%, you not even have 90%. I'll send this to you, I don't have it printed out. Your average for your elementary schools averages between 86 and 80. You have some schools that are more, you have some schools that will be 90 or maybe up to 94, but then you have some schools that are in lower 80s. 86 to 80% is what you really run at. So if you want to know what should you do, well, one of the indicators would be like explain to me how you do something different than you've done for the last 10 years. How are you going to accomplish that? The other is we talk about declining enrollment since 2006, but if you just look at the last 5 years, elementary enrollment has been flat. 5481, 5408, 5430, 5410, 5443. It's not really going up or down right now, so I question whether it's continuing to go down. I very much appreciate, Dr. Fraser, your spreadsheet that has the yellow and the green with all the different rooms, and it very much is helpful for the information to know that those 7 rooms that are at the cost of $3,500 aren't something that you would recommend educationally. I would really like, as a community member, if it would be possible to re-put that out with an indicator, because there are other rooms. There's actually 23 rooms that you could add, but then 3 that you would take away, 2 at Hillcrest and 1 at Rolling Hills. So I would really like to know of those other rooms, would they be educationally sound to add those rooms or not? There's a cost to them, but it's not gigantic. Some of them are larger than others. So that would be really helpful. I wanted to point out, to balance the districts, you have to add like somewhere between 240 and 350 students into the north sending area to have it be 50-50-ish. That's a lot to add. So I think that you can do it if you expand Wrightstown and add all those classrooms onto Feinstone if they were real classrooms that are educationally sound to add. And if you did that, the amount of capacity, you have a lot of schools in the South that are underutilized. If you did close Rolling Hills, you're avoiding, almost $16 million of renovation costs at Rolling Hills to spend whatever it is, 20 at Wrightstown, maybe a little at Feinstone. So I think it's important. Plus, you would be losing the cost of the administration for one of the schools. Plus, you have the land cost at Rolling Hills that you could capitalize on. So I think it's really a cost offset if you were to do that. Plus, it gives you a lot of what you want because you can balance the districts and you have people in the north going to school in the north, and it's sending through to your high schools at 50-50, which would be nice. Thanks.
Jenny, thank you. And just to answer your question, the other rooms that are not color-coded, yes, in my opinion, they are educationally sound.
Hello, my name is Kristen Marcel. I am a resident of Wrightstown. I have 2 children, a first grader at Wrightstown who loves it and is the happiest girl ever. And then I have a 2-year-old boy that I hope will also be at Wrightstown. So obviously there are a number of people that spoke from Wrightstown, so I'm not going to reiterate what they said. I just wanted to bring up a couple of, in my opinion, kind of like common sense things that I just took down tonight. One is the real estate appraisal reports. I do think that in the spirit of being transparent, that it makes sense to make them available. I personally don't want to read through them because I don't have time to, but I think that just being a transparent organization and body is really important. Obviously, you're going to do what you want. That's just my opinion. And I did want to clarify, I think Wrightstown is zoned to be an educational use. And so I'm not sure if that is why the figure was so low, on the low end for them. But just wanted to mention that. And then I also just wanted to, I don't want to say I want to challenge the board, but I just want to say that to me, it just, again, I'm not an expert in this area, but it seems to me like there are a lot of properties that you guys are trying to figure out and make decisions on. And before you add another property to your list of what you need to do with, you might want to make a decision on one of the other ones. So as someone who has been a part of this for years, I just think that I see the school as an educational area, not as like a real estate office. And so that's just something that I believe in. And then really, I really appreciate Wendy Thomas's comments about coming to the community or inviting the community here, whether it's Wrightstown, Rolling Hills. I just think it's really nice for the community to feel that way. I think I heard a story about someone from Richboro coming to the hearing recently, talking about not wanting to close Richboro, and the vote had already occurred a while ago. And so I just would like to reiterate, sometimes, even I probably know more than the most of the community does about this stuff. A lot of my friends ask me what's going on, and they really don't understand this. And so like half the people think they're going to be sent to one school automatically. Maybe after tonight they see pictures, they'll be able to get a sense of maybe what could happen. But it's just something that I think I really appreciate that. I think June is quickly coming. People are already planning vacations, and so this is something that needs to be decided soon. So, thank you again.
Thank you.
Hi, everybody. I'm Maureen Petrie from Richboro. A couple just items of clarification. I guess you can take them as action items. I need to understand what the difference is between Wendy's suggestion of the town hall-like meetings at Wrightstown and Rolling Hills versus the community committee that I think we were talking about at one point in time. We've had this community involvement committee back, 4 years ago, and they did something very similar to what this demographer is doing, and we're all still standing here. Also had a question about the birth to kindergarten rates, when I believe that a lot of people join this school district, not to bring up a sore subject, because we don't have full-day kindergarten in first grade. So not sure why we're looking at birth to kindergarten rates when we might be looking at first grade enrollment rates. And then one last point on the real estate data, and I'm looking forward just to going into the PowerPoint slides tomorrow and probably making an eye doctor appointment in the meantime. An example, like if you're looking at a block, and I looked at my neighborhood, 15 homes in my little area. Homeowners averaging 65, 70 years old, original owners. 6 of them have turned over in the last year. None of those homeowners had kids in the school district. They've all either graduated out or were in private schools. All of those new homeowners have kids under pre-K ages, all running around, great environment for the kids to be growing up in. How is that being captured? So just to get a clarification. But again, thanks for your time.
Can I address?
Yep.
So what I was suggesting is if on May 22nd, this board feels like they have their questions answered, to hold a night that says, before we take a vote to close a school, we say, this is going to be Rolling Hills night. Anybody who has questions or things that we should be thinking about before we vote, you would come on that night and speak. One night, not a committee, and the same for Wrightstown, and then we would have the meeting to vote.
Now, and I guess in addition to a community involvement committee,
The
that would
committee
be
involvement-
representatives from each of the districts or each of the schools?
That committee is for redistricting, meaning where you're going to draw the lines, which road's going to go where. This is our intent to close the
Okay.
school.
And
So it's just one night for each school.
Okay, and thank you for the clarification. I guess my comment, just to clarify further, is we've already had that community involvement committee where they did all the research 4 years ago. So that I wanted to clarify.
Yeah, they did, and that's an input to what we're doing, but that didn't touch on, it was more than just the redistricting. So that's already fed in as an input to, I think, all of our thinking. So that's great.
Hi, Jason Funk, Wrightstown Township. First, I wanted to say, breath of fresh air, by the way. I've been at these meetings for, I guess, the past 2-3 years, and you guys are doing a heck of a job moving this forward, and I want to commend you on that. I also want to thank some of the board members, Mr. Block and some other folks who are at least now looking into the potential of, what it would look like to actually add on to Wrightstown now that we know we physically can. I think that's at least something that our community certainly would at least like to be addressed, considering that some of the members before it said that it would be a discussion worth having. So I appreciate that. Main reason I want to come up is based off of the previous board meeting. Mr. Taylor did a presentation where he showed kind of avoided costs for various schools, kind of noted what the costs were for everything. And one of the things that stood out to me, because the way the avoided costs was supposed to be done was the schools as they are, meaning, how they're currently being run, and Wrightstown being a K-4. And in that avoided cost scenario, Mr. Taylor noted that there were 2 costs for Wrightstown that, as the school currently stands, really should not have been part of that avoided cost scenario. One was, I guess, $400,000 for the water, for the fire suppression system. The other being $300,000 or vice versa for the actual sewer or the septic system. It's my understanding, and from what we've heard today as well, that as the school stands now, none of those additions were needed. The only reason actual fire suppression systems would need to be added is if you were going to add on to the school. And of course, as we know, the school functions perfectly fine with the current septic system. So, and Mr. Foster pointed out that evening that, that came out to approximately $4,200 per student for Wrightstown and $3,400 per student for Rolling Hills. You take that money out, it's much closer to $38 per student at Wrightstown and the $34 at Rolling Hills. So I'd like you to understand, when we're putting numbers out here and putting out to the public, I just want to make sure that we're putting out the proper numbers. I mean, that was obviously something that was missed there, or at least in my opinion is missed there. And again, when you're talking only, $4,000 per child, $400 per child, and you're talking about removing one school from a community that will have now 0 schools to now a township or community that has 5 or 6. To me, it's, you gotta look at things differently. So thank you.
Thank you.
Bob Hickey, Northampton Township. just want to kind of add on to something that Mrs. Thomas said, and I agree with her completely about having some kind of forum for people to speak as to what's affecting the Wrightstown and Rolling Hills community. However, one community always seems to be overlooked, and that's Richboro, whether it's the middle school or the elementary school. The last time that this was, everything got redistricted, the only people that were really affected were people who go to Richboro Elementary and to Welsh. They're the only ones removed. Now, I don't know if it was a little faux pas that you said, but twice tonight, it was said Richboro Elementary is going to feed Newtown Middle School and then go to North. Maybe it's not set in stone, but the fact that it's just mentioned in that regard makes me seem like that is the only done deal in this. I don't know if any other elementary schools have been considered feeding the new Newtown Middle School or not, or whether or not it's even feasible. But I just wanted to add on to what Wendy was saying to have, when she talks about her meeting, is to add the Richboro community into that meeting. It's the Richboro Middle School that's being closed. I haven't heard yet any discussion as to what's going to happen to the current 6th graders in Richboro Elementary School when they're in 8th grade and all of a sudden their school's not there. Where are they going? What's going to happen to them? Are they going to be split? Are they going to be kept together? I don't know. I don't know what's going to happen to the Richboro, descending school. Is it going to be, are they going to go to South? Or, are they going to go to Newtown and then to North? Or are they going to go to Holland and then to South? So like I said, at this point, I just want to say, if you're going to have something like that, and I agree, we need to make a decision. We can't, you've been sitting on this for years. I was part of a committee 3 years ago that came up with these recommendations and nothing ever happens. And it just seems like the squeaky wheel is always the one that's getting greased. And Northampton seems like the little stepchild that just never gets addressed. So I would hope that if you had something like that, that the Northampton community, specifically Welsh, Richboro, and Richboro Middle, also have that opportunity to voice their opinions as well. Thanks.
Thank you.
Nancy Carroll, Newtown Borough. I also was on that committee 3 years ago, and I agree that we should make a decision as soon as we could. It's the only fair thing to everybody in the district. I know a lot about facilities because I go to almost every facilities meeting, and capital planning because I've been on 3 different capital planning things. And when these people come up with these questions or make statements that are wrong, I know what the answer is in my head, but that's not my job. It's not my job to answer them. It's your job to answer them. But I can tell you one thing people don't ever talk about is there's 3 ways to increase or decrease population in a school district: birth rate, turnover housing, and new housing. And every year, when you move kids out, you have to replace that number just to stay even. So, for instance, at Wrightstown, there will be 52 kids who will move on to Newtown Elementary next year. And there'll be 148 6th graders that'll move on to Newtown Middle. And then there'll be 380 8th graders that'll move on to North. And at North, we'll graduate 430 students. We have to replace those students just to stay even, that 430 or 500 that you graduate every year. And it starts out, they're kindergarteners and they move up the system. And that's how you replace them. And the methodology that he uses also the state used, and we used 12 and 14 years ago, it considers the trends. Because every year there's new housing. Every year there are kids born. Every year there's some turnover. And when it gets less, it decreases. When it's about the same, which is what you're doing, is taking an average to see if it's the same or less, that tells you what the school district is going to be over a lot of years. And that's what he did. And I think it was a great report. And I personally love the maps. So, the other things that 13 years ago, Richboro Elementary was the only school that didn't get redistricted in the last time, when we did it in 2000. They didn't even send kids over, but whatever. I'm trying not to answer other people's questions. I appreciate the work that you're all doing, and I really hope you make this decision before the summer. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening. Jen Keaveney, and I'm with Rolling Hills Elementary. I'm not a mathematician, but this seems like a pretty simple math problem to me. According to the new data that we have, there's only 13 classrooms available right now. Rolling Hills is 20. If you close Rolling Hills, you're in a -7 classroom situation. I'm not sure how that's a responsible decision. Rolling Hills is a centrally located school. We have an almost 50% walking population. So now you're -7 classrooms, and you have almost 200 kids that you have to transport that you didn't have to. Again, it just doesn't make sense for me. And listening to the scenarios that were brought up tonight about adding on to Wrightstown, how long is that going to take? We're looking at a redistricting within a year. I don't understand why for years Rolling Hills hasn't been given the funds it needs to be maintained the way it should be. And now suddenly we're going to have funds to add on to a school. Thank you.
Thank you.
Steve McGill, Northampton. I too appreciate all the work that goes on here. I think there's a way for the board to work smarter, and that is to stop relying on just the listserv, just the television broadcast of the meetings, and just the word of mouth that goes through the community. I think it's time that the district consider having somebody on board, either a vendor or staff, however you do it, as a communications entity to get the message out to everybody, not just the 10,000 that are on the listserv out of the 50-some thousand or 60-some thousand residents, taxpayers, and so forth, and not just the 10 or 15 people that watch it on TV. So, thank you.
Mr. McGill?
Yeah.
We talked about that a meeting or two ago. It's on the horizon.
We think that's an excellent suggestion. It's in the preliminary budget.
At finance.
Any final public comment? Going once.
You have a microphone that you just pass around if you want to be on camera.
Sorry, it's a public meeting. We have to keep everything for the record, but we're happy to hear your thoughts if you'd rather share them privately. You can always send things into capitalplanning@crsd.org, and the entire board will get your thoughts, as will Dr. Fraser.
You guys will, but no one else would.
No, that's actually, any new information that comes in through there is shared on our FAQ document that is printed online. So the intent was to be able to create a number of different avenues to be transparent in questions and in feedback that we're getting.
All right, so with verbal microphone option, a way that publicly be heard without visually being heard, is that not the realm of possibility?
Good suggestion. Any further public comment? All right, committee meeting adjourned. Thanks, everybody.
Okay. Let's go vote.